Hey everyone, welcome to the Being Patient podcast. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. When my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I decided to use my skills as a journalist in a different way. Frustrated by the lack of information on science and the inability to get different expert opinions, I decided to quit my job at the Wall Street Journal to create a better platform for people impacted by dementia. We are a community where news and information is created by our team of journalists. We ask tough questions and we simplify the science so that anyone can understand. We don't only cover disease, but delve into the latest research on what it takes to keep our brains healthy. We invite the experts and ask your questions. Here's today's podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. As many of you know, as much as we cover the research behind Alzheimer's and other dementias, we also delve into the topic of brain health. So we thought today we would focus on fasting. Of course, a lot of you have heard about or practice fasting. It's gotten very popular today. So we thought we would revisit the topic with Professor Valter Longo. He is at USC. He is the founder of the fasting mimicking diet, Prolon. Valter, very good to see you, and thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, so, since the last time we spoke, I, decided why not? I'm going to practice a couple of Prolons for 5 days. For those of you who don't know, fasting mimicking is you're following a strict program where you're having few calories, enough to trick your body into thinking that it's fasting. So I decided to try it. I've done it twice now. I found it really hard, but if I'm very honest, I felt really good at the end, when it was hard to get through the 5 days, but then I think, wow, I feel really great. I had a lot of energy and just felt like I really had a reset. What's happening, Valter? I'm going to back up for those people who aren't that familiar with fasting. What's happening inside our bodies to make us really actually feel better by depriving ourselves of food for a limited period of time?
Yeah, so we come from a history of having lots of food in the summer or whenever the food was available, and becoming insulin resistant, right? So the body becomes resistant to insulin and accumulates fat. And it's doing that because, and still happens, for example, in the emperor penguins in the South Pole, right? So they become large and potentially obese, and then they eventually don't eat for a couple months. And so then those couple months we used to have now never come. So then what happens in the fasting is that the body goes back to this winter mode, right? And so becomes insulin sensitive again, is burning fat. But also we've done a lot of work, particularly in mice, but also a lot of clinical trials now. And the mouse work very clearly shows this shrinking, elimination of lots of damaged components during the starvation period, let's say. But then the stem cells and other programs go to work, and when the food comes back around, it's a really remarkable regenerative program that has the job of bringing the organs and systems back to the ideal condition. So in these fasting refeeding cycles, we see lots of evidence for fairly sophisticated embryonic-like program that fixes lots of things that are wrong with the system. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with, there's a lot: inflammation, cellular damage, all of that. But I want to go back a little bit to the biological history of this, because could this happen to have maybe our bodies are meant this way because we started as hunters and gatherers, where we would eat and then not eat for a long time. Is there any historical association that we know of that we're just, as human beings, not programmed to eat all the time, and actually in spurts is better for us?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's hard to know what happened 20,000 years ago. But again, I think we see it with the animals surrounding us in various regions, particularly those where food may be more like it used to be, right? So let's say the South Pole, or you know, or the North Pole, or like the northern areas of Canada where some of the bears are. And yeah, so then it's difficult to imagine how you will have food all the time. And so it's very, very likely, and this is why hibernation came around, right? So yeah, hibernation is basically an evolution of a program that allows you to deal with a complete starvation, a long starvation period. And yeah, so I think that's where we come from very clearly. I mean, most organisms in the world are in starvation conditions. You know, this was my early days work with bacteria and yeast, and they're called stationary phase, right? Or sporulation state. So most microorganisms, which represent most organisms in the world, are starving most of the time. And once in a while, they get the food, they grow very rapidly, and then they go back to starving potentially for years, right? So I think that's also a very different version of that, but it's also our history.
So when you fast, there is something that's called, is it autophagy? Is that how I say it? Autophagy? That goes, yeah, that goes on the cellular level. Tell us, I mean, that's kind of cleaning out things that don't need to be there and rebalancing. Tell us a little bit on the cellular level, what's happening when we deprive ourselves of food for a specific amount of time.
Yeah, so there are lots of processes. Autophagy is one of them, and autophagy happens at the cellular level. And so the cell basically goes through a shrinking process itself, right? So the organism shrinks and lots of things happen. But at the cell level, the cell shrinks and basically eats its own components. So some of the organelles are broken down, lots of the proteins and other macromolecules are broken down. And of course, the purpose is to use them for fuel, but also to have less mass to worry about, right? So if a cell is large, it has to consume more energy. So it eats itself and it becomes smaller, so that now you have, you also consume less fuel. And both of them are important to surpass this fasting period.
So with your research, your latest research on disease prevention, and especially in particular Alzheimer's disease, what is the link? Why is it, like, I know it's really on, are you only really in the animal, like mouse studies stage of research, or have you tested on humans yet?
No. For Alzheimer, we're almost done with the clinical trial in Perugia, University of Perugia, University of Genova. And I think this was 60 patients and doing a monthly fasting mimicking diet, and also doing, because we were worried about the age of the patients, doing a daily supplement, sort of ketogenic, sort of high fat supplement. And thus far, I think that it's going better than we expected as far as compliance. I mean, we thought, an 80-year-old may struggle with 5 days of fasting mimicking diet. But I would say the majority of people could complete it and could get to the end of the study, which is about a year long. And so, yeah, we'll see what the cognitive effects are.
So you've given them 5-day fast once a month for a duration of 1 year.
Yes.
So and then, so when is that study finished?
I think they're enrolling now the very last patients, and so within, say, 6 to 12 months it should be finished. Yeah.
Actually, we got a question that had come in asking that someone had asked how they would participate in a type of fasting, this type of fasting study. Are you running other studies? Are some of them in the US? Is it only Italy? What are you doing lately?
Well, we hope after this is, so we published the animal study and we published the initial, I think 30 patients from the clinical trial. And so that's out and people can read it in Cell Reports. And so I think once the full clinical trial is out, then hopefully we can talk to our colleagues here in Los Angeles and elsewhere, and maybe get some funding to do a multi-center study on cognition and Alzheimer. Obviously, we are, because the fasting mimicking diet is, in addition to the autophagy, is causing a real revolution of the metabolism of the brain. So now all of a sudden the brain is gonna, it's forced to use ketone bodies and rewire in a sense. So we are hoping that all this together may be able to do, or at least help the drugs, or maybe do some of the things that the drugs are not able to do, just because by the time somebody has Alzheimer, the brain is such a advanced stage of dysfunction.
Okay, let's go back a little bit to the animal models research, where you actually found fasting mimicking diet cycles reduced neuroinflammation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that, we have been talking about that for 20 years, and we published, I think it's 2001, a paper suggesting the peroxynitrite was very, very toxic, and it was coming from the microglia, and it was killing the neurons, right? So, and sort of that went away, and nobody paid too much attention back then. And then maybe around 6 or 7 years ago, a lot of this started taking more front and center, this inflammatory hypothesis, and it was interesting in our. So there is a lot of people now that are saying that it's not just us anymore. I think back then it was just a few groups, but the Finch group and ourselves, but now it's a lot of people, and so I think that it was interesting from our paper, because when we actually said, well, let's just do what's called RNA-seq. Let's see all the changes that occur without having an opinion. And sure enough, many of the changes that occurred in the Alzheimer mouse models were inflammatory. So there's a lot of genes that were turned on and they were indicative of inflammation. And then when we did the fasting mimicking diet, many of these were brought back down. So it was very interesting, right? Because it was something that was less biased. It didn't really depend on what our opinion was of what was going on, but it was showing us hundreds of genes that are now increased, and they're in the neuroinflammatory domain, and many of these are now back to normal, or certainly lowered after the cycle of the fasting mimicking diet. And so now this hypothesis that the systemic metabolism is, of course, tightly connected with the brain, and this is not surprisingly, diabetes patients have 75% increased chance of developing Alzheimer, right? So, and I think a lot of this is being ignored, and to this day is viewed as, I think, by the neurobiology community is, this is, these additional things. No, I think it's not additional things. It's about the aging process, the metabolic dysfunction, and together, I think that with the brain, damage and inflammation, et cetera, that's where now you progress to the Alzheimer. So that's what it looks like, and so we were happy to see that we're going back to exactly this, the superoxide peroxynitrite, and this maybe in the microglia, maybe some other immune cells in the brain that are now confused, and they keep attacking, and they're keeping trying to do something that they should not do, and that's what we started to, we believe even more now to be at the center of the problem and at the center of the solution.
So the focus is, I think, I'm not sure everybody understands that process. So I want to delve a little bit into it. Now, there's two things going on. One is depriving calories, restricting calories actually forces our bodies into ketosis, right? Where we burn energy from fat. Is that fair to say with the fasting?
It's not just the calories, it's the type of calories, right? So you want to have low sugar and you want to have low amino acids, right? Low protein, low amino acids, and then high fat. You can have high calories and you can still, or relatively high calorie, and you can still get into a ketogenic mode.
So the hypothesis or the theory behind this is, the natural, we usually, glucose fuels our brain, but ketones are an alternative source of fuel for our brains. And so would you say like exchanging between those two systems is actually better for our brain health? Or should we seek to really be in ketosis for a longer state of time because that's better for our brain health? Or do we know?
We don't know, but I think that if you look at every other system that we looked at so far, so we look at the pancreas, the liver, the gut, and so I think you see these programs of shrinking and re-expansion that eventually become very sophisticated and able to fix the problem, right? It's almost like it's a program that was always there to understand how to put the organ back to where it was, right? And it makes sense, right? So you get wounded with a knife, 20,000 years ago. Well, you could die or you could survive, and if you survive, that everything gets regenerated, right? Or most of it gets regenerated. So then the question is, well, if it knows how to regenerate all of that, well, is it possible that the brain also knows how to, at least partially, regenerate itself? So I think that the ketone bodies become just a player in that message. We're starving. This is the moment to shrink. The brain doesn't really shrink like all other organs, right? So we know, for example, the heart can become 41%. This is all studies by Ansel Keys. 41% lower mass during prolonged starvation. I mean, this is long-term starvation. The brain doesn't do that, but we believe that in that process, it's now starting to change its program, high ketone bodies, lower glucose, using both ketone bodies and glucose as fuel. But that's a part of a reset, an attempt to look at what's wrong with it and maybe try to fix it as much as possible. Now, we're still at the beginning, and the question is, can we induce a true repair and rejuvenation, right? And that's more like science fiction right now. But I think that certainly set in the stage. Like, for example, in the pancreas, we took the mouse pancreas, damage it to the point that it's no longer making insulin. And then we start the FMD cycles. And, within a couple of weeks, it's making insulin again, right? Whereas the control is permanently damaged pancreas, right? So if we could do it in the pancreas and all these other organs, is it possible that we will be able to do it in the brain? I don't know, but certainly it's interesting. And I think, again, ketone bodies like autophagy are just parts of a very sophisticated program that does much more than those two things. I think people like to talk about one specific, mechanism and make it the whole story. But I think it's 3 billion years of evolution have come up with better than ketone bodies or autophagy.
So you call the prolonged diet a longevity diet. So what do we know about prolonging lifespan and fasting?
Yeah, well, we know, first of all, that, unlike the irrational exuberance, as Greenspan used to say about fasting, fasting, like calorie restriction, can go either way. It could do lots of good, neutral, or damage, right? And so, for example, we now know that people that skip breakfast, and if you skip breakfast, you're probably doing 14, 16 hours of time-restricted fasting every night, and they live shorter, right? And this is very consistent, more cardiovascular disease, and that will assume potentially also maybe more neurodegenerative issues. Yeah, so fasting is not necessarily a good thing, and we need to find the type of interventions, that the type of fasting, and I think the fasting mimicking diet is one of them, that can make the system younger. We're going to publish on that pretty soon, not on Alzheimer patient, but on regular people. We already published, well, we're going to publish on mice and people, like do the fasting making diet make you younger. We already publish in mice and makes them live longer. But can you actually take a mouse of a certain age, and would the biological age be reduced by the fasting making diet? And, so the indications are both in mice and humans that probably we'll see about the paper and the demonstration of it. But yeah, so I think that the fasting making diet is a reasonable, feasible way to achieve the effects of fasting, but a very particular type of fasting for a very defined length, right? People, again, they think that, well, maybe I could fast for 3 weeks. Well, if you fast, there's a paper in New England Journal of Medicine that nobody remembers anymore, but that showed that if people were put on a very severe calorie restriction, eventually they enter the thrifty mode, their metabolism slow, even adjusted per body weight, and now you're in trouble, right? Because now you went too long, and the body reacts by saying, okay, now my energy expenditure is going to be reduced, right? So now your brain, it tells you, eat, because something is wrong. I've lost lean body mass. The interesting thing is the attempt is not to regain the weight. The attempt is to regain the muscle and lean body mass lost during that starvation period. Right? So it's a very sophisticated system, and we have to be knowledgeable and respectful of it. And I think we're not going there. Like, everybody's just deciding, that I'm listening to somebody that until yesterday was a surgeon, and I make the decision that I should fast this way or that way, or I should be on a ketogenic diet, or I should be on a low carb diet. And this is really doing tremendous damage,
But Walter, I mean, there's so much hype over fasting today. How do you know? How do you actually know? Everybody's built differently, right? And so how do we know what's the right time frame? I mean, so many people I know are doing intermittent fasting, what you talked about, skipping breakfast, so that you have like a good 12 to 16 hour period of no food. But how do we know what's right for us? Like, are there certain things that we should be checking in terms of, glucose levels or, cholesterol? I don't know. Like, what should we check to understand what's best for us? Or is there a way to do so?
Yeah, there is a way to do so. This is why we started 2 foundation clinics, one in Los Angeles, one in Milan. And we have a team that includes PhDs and includes physicians. And they work together. They work with the universities. We do clinical trials, right? For example, we're starting a 500 people clinical trial in Southern Italy, randomized. And we have another one with all the patients that come in. Yeah, so these,
So you'd have to participate in a study. I was just thinking practicality, practically speaking, is there something I could check every week? Something I could wear, a monitor or something, to know that, oh, wow, this is my optimal.
This is what I was saying. Yeah, I think that, if you had a disease, you will go to a doctor, right? You will have that doctor follow you. So I guess my point is, yes, you can do lots of things. I wrote several books on it. The longevity diet is focused on that. And so you can read that. And I tried to write the book based on 5 pillars. So my point was, let's not just focus on epidemiology. First of all, let's personalize. So yeah, if you're a female and you're 82 years old, you're going to do something very different than if you're a male and you're 19, right? So, but also 5 pillars, like, clinical studies, epidemiology, basic research, centenarians. Like, what did the centenarian used to do? So I think it's certainly not something that it should be explained in 2 minutes. And then again, I think just like the doctor, is not something you wouldn't want your endocrinologist to tell you, oh, well, let me give you a recipe for what you should do to treat diabetes. It's the same way with nutrition and longevity, right? It's you need to be followed by a nutritionist, a registered dietitian that can, see where you're at, what your age you are, et cetera, and then, act and adjust, right? So yeah, I recommend people. It's a nonprofit clinic in Los Angeles, Create Cures a foundation clinic, and be followed by them. And I mean, there are people out there. I mean, I think maybe not too many that are as inexpensive as ours, but I think that there are other ways to get there. But yeah, I encourage people to find out who are the most trained in this area, and the most trustworthy, and then go to them and be followed by them,
So when you were referring to the longevity study with mice, and you said that the mice actually lived longer, what was the difference in lifespan?
I think the mean lifespan, I think, was about 11% longer. But then the 75% survival point was more than that, was closer to 20%. And and also, of course, the health span, that's where we see the even bigger difference, whether it's cognition or is frailty or is cancer. So all of those were improved in addition to the longevity.
So what would you recommend to our audience in terms of, I mean, I know you say it's like tailored for individuals, but I mean, should we have a degree of fasting in our lifestyle? We know there's one person who's listening in right now brought up the 12 lifestyle factors that were published in the Lancet study, right? And is asking, well, should fasting be in, maybe it should be the 13th, right? Like, where does fasting, we know exercise, diet, sleep, should fasting be a separate pillar? Should everybody consider this is a good way to practice to a certain extent? I mean, don't go too far, as you pointed out, but should it be on everybody's radar to at least practice to a certain extent for brain health and longevity?
Yes, absolutely. So, and the number one should be 12 hours of fasting and 12 hours of feeding, right? So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., eat within that time window, or 9 to 9 or 10 to 10, doesn't matter, as long as you keep it steady and you keep about 3 or 4 hours away from the sleep time, right? So that's one, right? And of course, you could go to 14, 16 hours, but for specific reason. For example, for cancer patient, we say 14 hours until the 5-year time, cancer-free survival time. 14 hours because of epidemiological data seems to be a better idea. But other than that, it's 12 hours, right? And then, I think the fasting mimicking diet, the way it's being clinically tested in many studies now, is probably good to consider at least 2 or 3 times a year. Now, I will say that, pretty soon, I think that because, again, diabetes is such a risk factor for Alzheimer, and Heidelberg, University of Heidelberg has already published on one study on diabetes, and fasting mimicking diet worked very well. There is several more we published 5 years ago on 100 patients that did the fasting mimicking diet, and certainly were lots of evidence for improvements in cardiometabolic risk factors. So I think that once the University of Leiden study is published, it's going to be pretty solid evidence that the fasting mimicking diet done at least 3 or 4 times a year, let's say, for most people that are overweight and obese, and they have a certain degree of risk for cardiovascular diseases, but also Alzheimer, I think that's probably a good idea. And together with what I call the longevity diet, right? So, and what I think most of the epidemiological data now supports, which is a mostly vegan, but not completely vegans, right? The vegans tend to, especially as you get older, right? Particularly, they tend to be protein deficient, maybe having higher levels of fractures, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a pescatarian, diet that is rich in whole grains, vegetables, legumes. But as you get older, it's got more and more animal protein or vegan protein that have high levels of certain amino acids, which are lacking, like, leucine, methionine, et cetera. And, but you see already getting technical, right? And so this is why I think, yes, I'm giving you some general ideas, but I think that, best to contact a registered dietitian, trained, not just any registered dietitian, somebody that has been trained in longevity, healthy longevity. I started at USC, the program, the first program in the nation for registered dietitian focus on health span. And so I think any of the students coming out of the USC program, I think, are going to be trained at least on this idea of I'm not just worried about what's going to happen to you in the next 3 days or 3 months, but I'm worried about you all the way until hopefully you make it to 100 and longer.
Which a lot of us will, so I'm told. This is a great question that's come in. This woman is asking, we know that 2 in 3 people diagnosed with dementia are women. Do you find different outcomes for men and women for this type of fasting?
Thus far, nothing that was very clear, whether it was in mice or it was in people. But I'm sure we will see that. I'm sure that eventually when we have thousands and thousands, now we have hundreds and hundreds of patients that we tested in clinical trials. It's not enough to see differences. But and even when we analyze male and females, we separate it, we reanalyze them, and we get about the same result. And but I think as we get thousands, then we'll probably start saying some things work less well for women or men. So, but
how much data do you need, and how long do we have to wait until you conclude whether or not fasting is, a way to stave off Alzheimer's disease?
Well, we can already say it if we consider the diabetes, right? So diabetes clearly a major risk factor for Alzheimer, 75% chance increased risk to develop Alzheimer. So clearly, if you go after the cardiometabolic risk factors, I mean, it's hard to separate the two. Maybe a mathematician will tell me, no, because we can do that. But yeah, if diabetes and metabolic dysfunction is at the center of the risk for Alzheimer, then clearly the nutrition is being implicated in Alzheimer risk. So then I think that, we know that by acting on longevity and particularly on cardiometabolic dysfunction, we should definitely be helping in Alzheimer prevention or postponement. Don't forget that if we can postpone Alzheimer by 5 to 10 years, we're gonna reduce the number of Alzheimer patients by half, right? Because people end up, dying of natural causes, so then.
And that's a big difference. If getting it at 70 versus 80 is a huge difference in terms of quality of life. Yeah.
Yeah, or getting it at 85 versus never getting it because, in 91, you're going to die of natural causes, right? So I think that's the aging, treat aging and treat cardiometabolic dysfunction and making the body more functional and as young as possible. I think it's, you can't go wrong. And it's just hard to imagine how, considering what I just said, that would not affect the incidence of Alzheimer.
Okay, so for healthy people, a lot of us are healthy. We haven't been diagnosed. We may have a family member who, like myself, who has a mom with Alzheimer's disease. Tell us a little bit about how you practice fasting. How should I be thinking about it? Is how much is too much? How much is not enough? Give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, 12 hours, I think it's a very good way to go. The longevity diet and then the fasting mimicking diet. At the beginning, 2 or 3 times a year, somebody was starting to have a clear cognitive decline, as we've done for the Alzheimer clinical trials. Now, I think we're hoping to soon enough have programs, lifestyle programs, and Dale Bredesen and other have been doing this for a while. And so, have lifestyle programs that will, include the fasting mimicking diet and everything else, where you have a physician and a neurologist following you. And, and why is that? Well, because again, if you're doing something on a 75-year-old and you're making them do the fasting mimicking diet once a month or once every 2 months, it needs to come with a package where, for example, we do this in the cancer. Cancer has similar problems for different reasons. A cancer patient, because they lose weight, they lose muscle mass. So then in our programs, we have them make sure that they do training, exercise, they do muscle training, and sure enough, we're able to keep them in good physical health Yeah, so then, yeah, the program needs to be adopted once somebody's older. But yeah, in your case, you're younger, and I think maybe doing the fasting mimicking diet 3 times a year. Now, we've also been talking to the people that are in the ApoE Foundation. Yeah, so if somebody was homozygote for ApoE4.
So meaning, just to explain to people, that's the Alzheimer's gene. If you have 1 copy, you have an elevated risk. 2 copies, you have more so. So
yes, yeah. So 2 copies of the ApoE4, right? So then that's a problem. Okay, no worries, but yeah, but start fighting it as early as possible, as tough as a manner as possible. So I would say, if I had 2 copies of the ApoE4, I would just go longevity diet, fasting mimicking diet, maybe every couple of months. Maybe the 12 hours of, make it 13 or 14 hours daily. I wouldn't overdo it, because again, then you could get in the opposite. You could start doing damage. And nourishment, right? So you start losing, have somebody watch your lean body mass, your muscle mass, your bone density. And I think it's a matter of keeping the equilibrium, keeping everything just enough, but not lower than the threshold. Because if you pass the threshold, now, your immune system and everything else starts not doing well, and now you're going to have a bigger problem than the solution you just acquired.
Now, in the Prolon literature, you recommend doing consecutive months, maybe 3 fasts, once a month for 3 months. Does it have to be sequential, or can you pick 3 months out of the year to say, I'm going to do it? Or are they the maximum benefits if you do it consecutively, month to month? Yeah.
So first of all, I separate myself from the company. I cannot even mention the name.
Oh, sorry.
I'm the founder, for disclosure purposes, but I cannot, I'm talking as a professor and as a company, and and I donate everything to charity, by the way.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit that has been created to really implement the fasting mimicking. It's not like you profit.
No, the company is not nonprofit. The company is a for-profit. My part of it, which is a large part of it, it's all nonprofit, right? So
okay,
all my part goes to foundation, the charity, to clinical trials, etc. But yeah, so I think that yeah. So then your question was
so do you have to, if you're practicing fasting mimicking, is it better to do
so the 3 cycle? Yeah. I think that the trials have almost all been, because of course it's difficult to do it other ways, but yeah, say 3 cycles once a month for 3 months, 4 cycles once a month for 4 months. The Heidelberg one was 6 cycles once a month for 6 months. So every trial so far has done it once a month for 3 months and then wait. So for example, in the first trial that we did at USC, we waited for 3 months and then we measured again. And 60% of the sort of the beneficial changes were still there. So that's encouraging, but it's suggesting also it's slowly moving away from the effect, right? So you just lost 40% of the effects. So, and in the Southern Italian trial, we're going to do the fasting mimicking diet once every 3 months. Right, so 4 times a year, once every 3 months, and we'll see. Right, so this is the first time though that we do it. So we suspect that it should work also once every 3 months, but that's not what is being clinically tested thus far. So probably maybe once a month for 3 months, and then wait, and then maybe 6 months later you could do 1 cycle. So there may be the entry practice and then a maintenance level, right. Let's say 3 times a year.
I mean, I kind of felt like when I was doing it, 3 days would have been enough, but 4 and 5 were quite hard. Is there a reason behind the 5 days? Is that where we see the maximum benefit?
Yeah, I mean, your response is unusual, right? So most of the people suffer for the first 3 days a little bit, and then they're okay. And on day 4 and 5, they say, I could go another 2 weeks because now you're in a fully ketogenic mode, right? So
right.
the gene is rewired and everything else, and now you're okay. And most people have a couple of months of reserve, right? So I think that the 5 days is important. 3 days is probably just beginning to shrink systems and organs, and not enough. Maybe the autophagy, et cetera, just beginning. They might not even beginning lots of cells. And then I think after 5 days, not only there is a compliance issue, like in your case, but I think there's also the risk of this thrifty mode metabolic switch. Now you sense prolonged starvation conditions, and you
slow your metabolism down, maybe, rather than right.
Yes. Yeah. So that 5 days seems to be and the fasting mimicking component. Some people, complain and they say, well, but my sugar spikes in the fasting mimicking. Everybody's, now has got devices and they test and but they have to appreciate in fact, the fasting mimicking diet is not a low carb diet. It's a high carb, high fat, low sugar, low protein, right? And we're trying to achieve all the things that we're discussing. And I urge people to let us, give us advices if you haven't, but let us do the science, and don't worry about things. Worry about the clinical trials and the results of the clinical trials, and the mouse studies and the results of the mouse studies, but not so much what happens to the sugar level after you do soup number 3.
Right. Okay. And when should we check in with you next about the results of a significant trial? When will you know more?
It's gonna take, the trial, I would say, hopefully, within a year, we will have published the trial in Perugia and Geneva. And then let's see if we start. It's a 60 patients, so a relatively small trial, but we never know. It could start showing some positive results. We'll see. Great.
Thank you so much, Valter Longo, for joining us and making the time. We're going to check in with you in a year to see what you found with those results from Italy. But thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. And I know it's a topic a lot of us are really interested in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so if you missed any of that interview, go to beingpatient.com. We always repost these interviews. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter where you can see more. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. For more information on upcoming interviews, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at beingpatient.com. That's beingpatient.com. And send us any feedback you may have, whether it's someone you want us to interview or any comment about our podcast series. You can do so by emailing info@beingpatient.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm Deborah Kahn.